Boker Tov. Ma Shlomkem. One of you after the exam is still saying Tov. All right? I didn't hear anyone say Ra, which isn't hooray, but it's just bad or poorly. All right? So, thankfully, you should be doing well. Before we sing, let me just share with you a little bit of how important it is to learn Hebrew and learn it well, and how it is that mistakes are made a lot of times that people who ought to know better just don't catch. This is a news article that came to me yesterday from the Jerusalem Post, and then from Reuters, and then from BBC, and then one of my students sent it to me as well. He had found it, and this is what it says. Tourism officials in Israel did little to sell the city of Jerusalem as a must-see for visitors when a brochure suggested that it did not exist. The sightseeing pamphlet was translated from Hebrew and should have read, "Jerusalem, there's no city like it." But instead, the slogan in English read, "Jerusalem, there's no such city." Tens of thousands of the leaflets were distributed before the Jerusalem municipality realized its mistake. The flyers were promoting the musical and arts festival held in the city in August. A spokesman for the Jerusalem municipality said the flyer was apparently translated by someone outside the municipality. In new publications, this mistake has been removed. And in the current political climate, that's a bad mistake to make, to say the city doesn't exist. So yes, translation does make a difference. It's something we really have to pay attention to. Well, let's sing and lift your spirits a little bit. And besides that, we've had some good animated emphasis from next door. It's our turn to return that favor. We're going to be singing Psalm 118, verse 24, 90, verse 14, Isaiah 25, 9, all three of which have the primary phrase found in this song that's very familiar to you, Hava Nagila. How many of you have heard Hava Nagila before? All right. Now let's get it started on about the right range here. Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila venismecha. Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila venismecha. Hava veronena, Hava veronena, Hava, Hava veronena, Hava neronena, Hava neronena, Hava, Hava neronena. Uruachim v'net sameach, Uruachim v'net sameach, Uruachim v'net sameach, Uruachim v'net sameach, Uruachim, Uruachim v'net sameach. Got it? Now this is also a test of your reading ability, and by the way, I was reading the song wrong there at one point. I was saying Veronina, it's Ne-ronina. Jeremiah?
And at times you were pronouncing the wow with the V?
Yes, that's because it's a modern Hebrew song, so we'll sing it in modern Hebrew. We're going to stay contextualized. When we sing the modern Hebrew songs, we'll pronounce it with modern Hebrew. When we sing the biblical songs, we'll sing them with biblical Hebrew. This is a modified form. It's a rewritten form of these two psalm entries and Isaiah. It's not identical. And such a popular song in modern days, we won't sing it Hawa, we'll sing it Hava, okay, like everyone else does that's Jewish. Okay, let's try it one more time, okay, and sing it with some joy. I mean, you just finished an exam, right? You're still living, you're still breathing, you're alive. Think of that, all right? And you've learned something, especially when you get the exam back. You see, that's when the real learning curve begins. Because an exam is not the measure of what you have learned, it's a measure of what you know at the time you take it. But having taken the exam, you'll learn more. And so when the exam comes back to you, your actual knowledge will have increased. because when you see the mistakes you've made, you've gone through it. That's another reason why I don't put a heavy, inordinate amount of weight on grading the final exam in a course, because the final exam is not an accurate gauge of your true knowledge. Because to do that, we'd have to take another exam after that exam. And then, of course, that just keeps going ad infinitum, so you never finish. All right, let's sing it again. Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila Venismecha. Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila Venismecha. Hava Neronina, Hava Neronina, Hava Neronina. Hava Neronina, Hava Neronina, Hava Neronina. Uruachim v'netzamecha, Uruachim v'netzamecha, Uruachim v'netzamecha, Uruachim v'netzamecha, Uruachim, Uruachim v'netzamecha. Now you'll notice many differences in pronunciation between the modern Hebrew and what you see up there as compared to what you've learned for pronouncing biblical Hebrew. Neronena uses an O sound, even though it's a pathak in the actual printing from the text in the Old Testament. And that's because the form Ranan among the modern Hebrews is usually pronounced Ronan. And so there's some variations that come here. But basically what you're singing when you sing Hava Nagila, you're singing let's rejoice, let's rejoice, let's rejoice and be glad, let's rejoice, let's rejoice, let's rejoice and be glad. Let's shout for joy, let's shout for joy. Or you could sing, or you could put that sing for joy. It's a singing with a shout, it's a ringing shout. Let's shout for joy, let's shout for joy, let's shout for joy, let's shout for joy. And then you have arise, or literally awake. Awake, awake, brothers, and be happy. 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 All right? So that's what you're singing. And so uru is a command to many to awaken. Achim, remember you had ach, brother. Achim is the plural. You've probably already heard the plural when you talk about cherubim. Cherubim is plural. Seraphim is plural. The singular is a cherub and a seraph. All right? So when you have the I-M ending, that's plural as you're looking at that. And as far as anything else to learn from this, we'll have to wait for some of that to come at a later time. But that should build a little bit more vocabulary, a little bit more knowledge of the Hebrew, a little bit more of the sounds of it, and an ability to sing as well. Or maybe I should say ability to sing. You know, some of us have a hard time carrying a tune in a bucket, but that's all right. We'll get there. Okay. Well, let's go back to our accents. Oh, by the way, before we go to the accents, real briefly, I want us to review the exam. Pull that one out here. Just to tell you some of the things. On the non-final and final forms, the 5 Hebrew letters, remember those are the sophites. You know, you have a kaf and a kaf sophite. You have the nun and nun sophite, a mem and a mem sophite. You have a tzadi and a tzadid sophite, etc. So watch for those. The rules governing the gutturals, what were the rules governing the gutturals? They prefer an A-class vowel. They refuse doubling. They prefer compound schwa. And you had the silent and vocal schwas to identify, and the 6 Hebrew letters that can receive dagesh leni, you remember that by saying what? Bagad kafath, and you write them out. Beit, Gimel, Daleth, Kaf, Pei, Tau. All right? And then the 22 letters of the alphabet you should know by now, and We'll take a look at your dividing the words into syllables and transliteration. Yehuda has 2 syllables because the shurik and the comets. You divide between the daleth and the shurik. And then Yismaru has also 2 syllables. Just divide between the 2 schwas because one's silent and one's vocal. One ends the preceding syllable, one begins the next one. And then Wahazini has 3 regular vowels, and you divide before the noon, before the aleph with the hatif pathic. And those are the 2 places you divide that. And then the other matching, we'll go through that and see that with you. And true and false. Kametz hatuf is also called kametz hatof. True or false? True. The kaf sofit always takes a vocal schwa when it stands vowelless. True or false? It's false. What does it take? Silent schwa. Yes, right. And then to circle every vowel letter, that's to circle the hirik yods, the tsere yods, the holem wows, the shuriks, and the kametz hays. Those are the ones to watch for and to circle. By the way, there was a trick in there. I won't count it against you if you circled it. But remember that the way that Yahweh has been written in the text, that they use a schwa under the yod, and then under the wow, you have a kametz. So there looks like a kametz hay at the end, but it really isn't. Okay? So you really shouldn't have circled that, but if you did, that's not a problem. I'm not going to count it. But it's a tricky one. Pardon? You should ignore the vowels in Yahweh. Correct. All right? Because the vowels that are there are artificially supplied. Correct. Okay, on your vocabulary, davar means what? Word, matter, affair, thing, okay? We skipped yam, but we read it the other day, and you'll have it on your next vocab exam. Anyone remember what yam means? Sea, S-E-A, sea, sea or ocean. And al, ayin, patak, lamed, what does that mean for next quiz? No one knows it yet. Upon or above, okay? That's why we threw it out, you see. Get a free 2% there. What's the meaning of mut? To die. Ach, brother. Isha, woman or wife. Av, father. Amer, he said. Lakach, he took or he received. And Edonai, Lord or master, with either a capital L or a lowercase l. All right. Well, it sounds to me like you probably did well, and I'm looking forward to it. Okay, let's go back to accentuation. Let's start again and go over the things that we talked about on Tuesday, and then continue to finish this out so that you're fully prepared and ready. Remember, next week we have vocabulary quiz number 3, which is on chapters 4 and 5 vocabulary. Before we leave today, we'll go back over those and read them one more time. Your workbook exercise number 5 is due. This is the chapter we're in right now that we're looking at. And then you're to read chapter 6 in preparation for Tuesday. Accentuation. Remember we said that it preserves proper reading. It indicates the syllable to be stressed. It represents cantillation of the text. In other words, how to sing it or chant it, how to recite it as they do in the synagogue. It indicates logical divisions of the verse. Now, keep that in mind. It's not mathematical division of the verse. It's not, when you have the athnak, it's not the center of the verse by measuring the number of syllables, the number of letters, or the number of words. It's the logical middle. It's like using commas and semicolons and periods in English. They divide off logical thought, not mathematically balanced lengths of lines or sentences. And these, therefore, are exegetically significant because they do mark the logical divisions and relationships within the verse. So they are important to learn. And we're beginning by learning a basic few. There are over 30 different accents in the Hebrew text. And then there are a different set of accents for poetic books as opposed to the prose books. And there's a different way of marking the middle of verses in poetry as opposed to prose. But we'll learn all those later. We're just trying to get some of the basics down for now. Most Hebrew words, remember, are accented on the last syllable. We've tried to learn that in pronunciation for vocabulary. That's what we call milrah. Milrah is the Hebrew reference to pronouncing words with the accent on the last syllable of the word. So a word like shamer, we accent on the last syllable. It's not accented on the first. It's not shamer, it's shamer. Okay? Shamer. Everyone say that together. Shamer. If we accent it on another syllable, it's normally the next to the last syllable, and that is called milel. And milel is like a word such as the word for king, melech. So the accent, notice, is given. It'll be a different, perhaps, accent than what you see there, but there will be an accent to indicate the pronunciation is to be emphasized at that point. And in your vocabulary listing, we supplied this artificial accent here. It's a real accent, but it doesn't occur this regularly. We supplied it to show that this is a milel pronunciation. So melech, everyone, melech. It's not melech, it's melech, okay? Accent on the first syllable. That's milel. And one of the examples of where this makes a difference is in Isaiah 40, verse 3, as quoted in Mark 1:3. You'll see the two little dots above the resh in kore. Kol kore. Everyone, let's pronounce this together. Kol kore. Again, kol kore. Notice you have a kof there at the beginning. It looks like it has a little foot on it. That's because the accent has merged with it just in this particular font. This font isn't very clean in the way that's put in there. Then you have the next part is Bamidbar Panu Derek Yahweh. Everyone, Bamidbar Panu Derek Yahweh. And that means the voice, a voice crying, a voice calling out, and then the two dots above the resh up there indicate then that we have the accent, and that's a major accent. We'll be looking at it. We'll learn the name of it. It's called Zakef Katon. The Zakef Katon is a major disjunctive accent. It normally marks the quarter points in a verse, where you have the first half divided in half again, then the Zakef Katon can be used there, and the second half divided in half again, it can be used there as well. And this one that looks similar to it, that's on Midbar, has a line on the left of the two dots, and this is Zakef Gadol. This is Zakef Katon, which means little Zakef. Zakef Gadol means big Zakef, and the big Zakef is actually the lesser of the two accents. It is weaker in its disjunctive. And so you ignore it when it's found together with Zakef Katon. And so the dividing point comes after the Zakef Katon. So the Hebrew is saying, a voice crying out. And then it tells you what the voice is crying out. The voice is saying, quote, in the wilderness, prepare the way of Yahweh. Unquote. Okay? Now you go to the Greek New Testament in Mark 1:3 and you look at the UBS text and you'll find that it says phone baontas ente eremo and then the dot that indicates a colon. Now those punctuations that are used in the modern editions of the Greek New Testament are added by the modern editors according to their interpretation of the reading of the Greek text. This tells you that the editors of the UBS Greek text do not know Hebrew, all right? Or they did not bother to go back and take a look at Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3 to see what the Hebrew said. And so they have inserted the colon, this dot here at the end, they inserted that colon at the wrong place. It belongs up here after baontas, a voice calling, quote, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. They put a capital E on hetoi masete, and that capital E is not in any manuscript. That is their editorial addition to the text in order to accommodate it to their readers. And so they're indicating that you begin that reading here as far as what the voice says. And so they take ente eremo as being a adverbial prepositional phrase modifying calling out, telling where they called out. A voice calling in the wilderness. And what did the voice in the wilderness say? Prepare the way of the Lord. Totally different than the Hebrew text. And it's in error. The Hebrew text is correct and ought to be maintained, because the Greek, taken without the modern additions to it, can easily be read that way, because you would expect ente eremo to be placed at the beginning of this because it's at the beginning in the Hebrew. And it is translating directly from it, and it is demonstrating that that's how it should be taken. So it's important to learn your accents. It sometimes, in a few cases, will help you even to correct the modern editors of the Greek New Testament who don't know Hebrew. John?
I guess I'm wondering, in things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, do they use accents or even vowels? And if not, so do we view the accents as part of the inspired text, even though the original authors didn't write any accents?
All right, good question. Let me answer that two ways. First of all, the first question is, what about the Dead Sea Scrolls? What did the Dead Sea Scrolls use 250 years before Christ? The Dead Sea Scrolls did use vowels. They used vowel letters to indicate the vowels. And we'll show some examples of that later on when we get deeper into Hebrew. And so they would use the vowel letters to indicate how a word needed to be pronounced in case by just the consonants it could be confused with two that would be spelled the same in consonants but be pronounced differently if you were to add the vowels. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls do supply those, and it confirms the accuracy of the Masoretic text, because there are not any disagreements with it, basically. And as far as accents, the accents were added by the Masoretes starting about AD 500. There were no such things as accents in the Dead Sea Scrolls or in the text prior to AD 500. There were certain vowels inserted by various vowel systems prior to AD 500. There were three different vowel systems: Palestinian, Tiberian, and Babylonian systems that you have in the front of your grammar textbook discussed. But these are added afterwards. Now, that brings us to the next question. Can we trust the Masoretes in what they have done with both vowels and now with accents? Absolutely, 100%. There is no reason to question them at all. As we go back and we check, first of all, if we looked at the total history of the Masoretes process, they were checked each step of the way, and they argued for their case for over 500 years. And they responded to every critique and every criticism. And they made certain that what the final result was exactly the way everyone could remember that the text was pronounced and the way it was conveyed by memory and verbally for all the centuries before. And checking against other translations, the ancient translations like the Greek Septuagint, for example, done 300 years before Christ. The Samaritan Pentateuch, for the 5 books of the Pentateuch, that was started about 400 BC, completed at 100 BC. Looking at the Syriac Peshitta that was begun in 125 AD and completed in 400 AD. Looking at the Latin Vulgate that Jerome did in 400 AD. All of these precede the Masoretes. All of them precede the Masoretes. And we look at the translations into Greek by Aquila, 100 AD, by Symmachus, by Theodotion. We look at the work by Origen in his Hexapla in 213 AD, or 230 AD, excuse me, 230 AD. All of them precede the Masoretes. And the amazing thing is that all of those who worked before the Masoretes in producing these texts give evident and give plenty of confirmation that the Masoretes did not mistake the vowels nor the logical divisions of the verses. So there is a full range of testimony running through it. You also can consider the intertextual testimony, where the Old Testament quotes itself, and you can find the same proofs, and where the New Testament quotes the Old. You have that as well, and all of that is pre-Masoretic. and there is no viable option to the Masoretic text. There is no overwhelming evidence contrary to the Masoretic text on any particular point, with a couple, maybe a handful, about 5 or 6 arguable instances only in the entire text. And every one of those is easily resolved by both the internal testimony and comparing the manuscript evidence. And most of them are resolved in favor of the Masoretes. Okay? Does that answer your question, basically, for now? Before we get into greater detail in OT 603 and later in OTI? Kelly.
So the idea is that they were able to look at the Greek manuscripts and see what vowels they had.
No, it's not the idea at all. Masoretes never referred to the Greek.
Right. No, I'm saying that when you say that it confirms it, as in the Masoretes did it from the tradition of what they knew, but then they took what they did and compared it to, not that they did it, but others can compare it to, you're saying, these older Greek translations.
We can compare the Masoretic text with the current Greek text that was done 300 years before Christ, and we can see.
Watching the vowel points match the vowels that are supposed
Watching
to be
the
Greek.
meaning. Remember, we're talking here about the meaning, because there's no vowel points represented in the Greek Septuagint. They're not representing vowel points. They're not trying to transliterate the Hebrew. They're translating the Hebrew. So we're looking at the meaning to find out if the Masoretes, in putting their vowels in and putting their accents in, preserve the right meaning. Because the question here, for example, is where does in the wilderness go? It's a matter of meaning, and it's a matter of the Masoretic accent. So we go back and look at the other translations, and do the translations indicate that in the wilderness belongs with the voice calling, or does it belong with what the voice called? Okay? So that's what we mean by comparing. All right? Yes, Jeremiah.
I have a question about the comparison here to Mark and Isaiah. Wouldn't it be possible that even with the accenting in Isaiah, that Mark could have still wanted to show a different aspect? And I think that we see that with a lot of Old Testament quotations in the New, where the author somewhat doesn't do it exact, changes it just a little bit, because he proceeds in verse 4 to then say, and John the Baptist was present in the wilderness. So maybe he was being ambiguous in his grammar in order to lead the way for the next verse, where he's saying, and now the fulfillment is that John the Baptist is physically in the wilderness.
Okay, that's a good question again. Could it possibly be that the New Testament writer has reconfigured or used a different emphasis or a different division to make his purpose known, or in order to get across his point? And my answer to that is absolutely not. I think that impugns the interpretive practice of the New Testament writers. It impugns the Holy Spirit's accuracy in the use of his own word. In over 40 years of preaching, in over 38 years of teaching and of study of the Hebrew text and of New Testament quotations, and by the way, this has been one of my areas of greatest interest, that I started when I was a seminary student, doing a full cataloged examination of every quote of the Old Testament and the New, and trying to examine them. I have not yet found a single example where the New Testament writer has used the Old Testament out of context, or has twisted it, or perverted it, or altered it in any way in order to get across his concept in a way that violated what was originally said or what was originally understood. I've not found one yet. There are some difficult examples to deal with. The most difficult, Matthew 2:15's use of Hosea 11:1. But I think that can still be answered. And my response is, when we interpret the Old Testament text in its own context carefully, we will find that it does not say anything different than the New Testament writer said it said. Okay? And Dr. Thomas and I were talking about that just the other day, sitting down, because we have a slight disagreement on some of that. And so we were discussing the differences there, and we've promised each other we're going to sit down and talk about it more. In fact, I've got part of a journal article prepared for that. We were discussing a journal article at the time, And maybe one day we're going to put something together that he and I either both have worked on, or we'll have a give and take on it. But be very careful about what you do there. I think it's a grave misconception to think that there are many verses where the New Testament writers have even potentially changed the text. And here, the only reason anyone is saying this is because of a modern editor's addition of punctuation. This was not a question at all, and never taken differently than what the Masoretic text said until the modern editors, within the last 150 years, started adding modern punctuation to the Greek New Testament, and that's where they made the mistake. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be discussing this issue. It was not an issue until 150 years ago. Okay? Does that help answer your question without going into great detail, because we don't have time today?
Okay. I'll ask a little bit more after class.
Okay. All right. All right. So, and then also come to OT 603, third semester, and also OTI, and sometime take a course in Hebrew exegesis of the Old Testament, a particular Old Testament book, because we get into such issues in detail in the later courses. All right, let's continue on the accents. Disjunctive accents are the first major grouping. The athnak is the first of these. The athnak looks like an upside down V. It looks like an upside down V. It is put to the left of a vowel to indicate that that is the syllable that is to be accented. And then that word then is in pause, we say. It's in pause because it has a major accent connected to it. So here we have be'otzrotau, and the athnak indicates the middle point of the verse logically. The middle point of the verse logically. The segolta is like a segol turned upside down and put above the word instead of below a consonant like the segol vowel. And so the segolta, hiskiyahu, here is a major disjunctive accent. It's primarily used in those situations where you have a curse being introduced. Zakef katon. Zakef katon is two dots above a word. So you have kelau here. Zakef katon indicates normally a quarter marker. So that if you're looking at a verse and you're going through it, let's say we've got a verse here of 9 words. Let's start over here, going from right to left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And at the end of the 9 words, you have the sof pasuk, which are these double diamonds that indicate the end of a verse. And as you see the sof pasuk in that position, that tells you the verse is over. And the athnak can occur anywhere in here because it's not mathematically arranged. It depends on the meaning and the logical relationships within the verse. So let's put the athnak, for argument's sake, over here on the 5th word. That will be the midpoint of the verse then. Okay? Everything through that word is the midpoint of the verse. And so as we divide that verse, then there is the major dividing point of the verse. Then we're going back and looking for the quarter points. And if we find the 2 dots above that are the zakef katon, then that indicates that this is the quarter point here. And if we find the zakef katon over here, then that indicates that the quarter point is here. So you have the verse divided into 4 parts. Now, can it be divided into more than 4 parts? Yes. Does the zakef katon occur every time you have a quarter marker? No. We have another accent that also serves as a quarter marker. Yes, Eric?
Segolta, unless I'm mistaken, is not in chapter 5.
No, you have to add it in your notes from lecture. Okay? All right? So as you're looking at these, going across, this is the type of situation you have. This is a type of patterning. And so you look at these, and it shows then that the dividing point here is greater than the dividing point here. The dividing point here is greater than the dividing point here. So this is the strongest logical division of the verse. This is a weaker logical division of the verse. And so that weaker relationship, sometimes it will continue the thought, sometimes it will continue the sentence, sometimes there will be a full break. And so you have to determine that by translation and by context as to whether or not this Zakef Katon turns into just a comma, or if it turns into a semicolon, or whatever it turns into. The same for the Athnak, whether it turns into a comma, a semicolon, or even a period. You have to determine by context. And the same with the Zakef here, and even the Sof Pasuk. The Sof Pasuk has to be determined because there are places where the Sof Pasuk is not the completed sentence, that the sentence continues in the next verse. So the verse division is not breaking the sentence, it's not where the period comes. It's breaking the sentence at a major point. And it's saying, the Masoretes by that are saying that even though they're dividing the sentence, that the first half of the sentence is so significant and so important that they put a sof pasuk there to stop and make certain that you stop at that point before you go on. But it may go on as we look at it. Yes? Sigolta can occur anywhere, but it normally occurs up front and usually introduces a quotation. Usually introduces a quotation that is a curse. Okay? Yes?
You're talking about logical breaks and pauses. Do we understand that in English grammar terms, like these are going to be subordinate clauses, the main grammar is here and everything else is subordinate to that? Or are these just cantillation logical breaks?
No, they involve both.
Okay.
They involve both. And so you've got to take a good close look at the context and the flow of the text to understand what the relationship is between the two halves. Okay? We'll be giving examples later that'll help clarify that. Right now we're just getting the mechanics. And later we'll get the examples and how it actually works and functions. Okay? The Rabia is the other quarter marker. It is a single diamond. So you can often see, for example, a Ravia used in place of a Zakef Katon. So we could replace this over here with a Ravia, and you would have a quarter marker. In fact, Ravia means fourth. Ravia means fourth. So you have it there. Now, the different thing about Ravia is that it can have several different functions. The Ravia can be that which introduces a quotation, direct discourse, just like the Sigolta did, where the Sigolta is more reserved for negative statements normally. The Ravia is very normal to put on introducing a quote. And also the Ravia marks the quarter point. And in addition, the Ravia can occur on a word just to indicate that it's the main topic of that clause or sentence or verse. All right? And so it's not unusual to find the Ravia put on the very first word of a verse to indicate that it is the primary topic or theme of the entire verse. Kelly?
Is there a type of quote that it introduces, like the Sigolta being
No.
more of a curse?
It can any kind. Yeah, the Sigolta is the only one that introduces a quote that has some specialized meaning, and it's most of the time it introduces a quote that is negative, but not all the time. John?
Just to sum up again for that, it indicates the main topic and it introduces a quote.
And can mark the quarter point, just as we have up here on the example up here. Okay, 3 uses of Rabia. Marking the quarter point, marking the main topic, and it could also mark the introduction of a quotation. Those are the 3 uses of Rabia. Dennis?
They can be a quarter marker and can introduce a
Correct.
quotation, or
It
always?
can, no. It can be one of the 3. It'll be one of the 3.
Not multiple.
No, not multiple. It'll be one of the 3. Okay? All right? Let's go from the Ravia then to Zakef Gadol. That's the one we saw there on Bam Midbar in Isaiah 40 verse 3. It's the 2 dots of the Zakef Katon, but has a bar on the left-hand side of it. a line up there, Zakef Gadol, all right? That one probably will not also be in your textbook. This is for lecture note here that you're taking in there. And the Seluk is a vertical line that is on the last syllable of a verse. And so normally, in fact, I would not say normally, I'd say always, it is followed then by a sof pasuk, the double diamond. So if you're on this word up here, the last word, the last syllable of that word will have the seluk on it, the seluk. And so seluk marks the last syllable of a verse, the last accented syllable of a verse. Excuse me, not last syllable, last accented syllable of a verse. And so if you see the seluk here, you know that there would be a sof pasuk, a double diamond that would follow it. It'd be Bakol Mem Shal To. Disjunctive. These are all disjunctive accents. They're dividing, not joining. They're dividing. They're separating. John?
Maybe I missed it, but did you mention what the Zakef Gadol does?
Zakef Gadol is just a major disjunctive accent, and it is inferior to the Zakef Katon. That's all that, it is not a quarter marker. It does not always occur, rarely occurs in actuality, and that's it.
So it's inferior even though...
It's inferior.
Even though it's Gadol.
Even though it's Gadol, correct. It's called Gadol because it has more space taken up and has more marks. That's why it's called Gadol. It has nothing to do with power, it has everything to do with size. Yes?
You say it's disjunctive that it divides. Does it divide in that word, or does it divide
divide
word?
in the sentence.
So from that word to the next.
Right.
Okay.
It divides that word from the next word.
Okay, so after.
Right. Divides the next word, yes. After that. Remember, you're reading from right to left.
Right.
So it divides after it. Okay? Scott?
Is the Goth, that's the schwa looking like thing with the line next to it, both of those together?
Zakef Gadol. That's the two dots in line, yes. Two dots in line. All right? All right? Now let's go to conjunctive accents. There are a lot fewer conjunctive accents than there are disjunctive accents. And we're not covering all the accents, as I said. We'd have to cover over 30 of them to cover them all. And some of them are so minor and so inferior that there's no reason to even discuss them in any major thing unless you're going to be looking at canting it or singing it, or you're looking at individual minor points and trying to figure out the relationships between words. The conjunctive accents, the major conjunctive accent, the primary one, is called munach. The munach looks like an L that's backwards and occurs underneath and to the left, underneath the consonant and to the left of the vowel. So as we read this one, the eth beit nekoto tells us that the beit cannot be separated. The word beit there cannot be separated from the word that follows, nekoto. It has to be kept together with it. Okay? You never, ever, ever divide those two in interpretation. You do not stop. You do not pause. You don't put a comma between beit and nekoto. They belong together. They are connected together. And it's like marrying man and woman. They are now one flesh, and let no man put asunder. All right? So when you see the munach, do not separate that word where you have the munach from the word that follows it, because it's a conjunctive accent. It is not separating from the following word like the disjunctive accents. It's joining with the following word. Okay? It joins with the following word. Yes?
Back on that, the following word, that's not what is.
Nekoto.
Okay.
Nekoto is the following word. Next word as you go from right to left. Okay? That's the following word. Scott?
If it applies to words, then how come like in this example below the
What page are you on? Let's look at it so we know where everyone is.
46,
Okay, on page 46,
there's the 2D, paragraph 2D.
paragraph 2D.
Below it, there's two lines with the arrows above them.
Yes?
the second one, on the bottom to the left, why wouldn't the backwards L be at the very beginning of the word in the middle? If it's adjoining words, why would it make a difference?
I don't understand your question.
I'm not sure. Never mind.
It's combining Yahweh to that other one?
Remember, it connects with the following word. That's why you have the line connecting those two words.
Right, I understand it connects words. I'm just asking where it's placed in the sentence. If it's connecting words, why wouldn't it also?
No, it has nothing to do with the sentence.
I mean, connecting words, why would it not be at the beginning of the word?
You mean at the end of the word?
Well, it's just different. It changes. That's what I'm.
That's because derek is pronounced with an emphasis on the first syllable.
Okay.
Remember, the accents are going to be placed where the emphasis goes when you pronounce the word. That determines where it's placed. Okay? This word derek is like melech. It is milael, not milra. Therefore, the accent is put on the next to last syllable. Okay? Thanks for asking that question, because that gave me an opportunity to emphasize the other again too. All right? And you'll notice something. We've had two words accented on the first syllable, and they both had what? Melech, derek. What did they both have? Besides that. Besides that. Segols. They both have two segols. Those are what we call segolate nouns. Segolate nouns. And segolate nouns are always emphasized, always accented on the next to the last syllable. Okay? So anytime you have a noun with two segols, even if someone's forgotten to put the accent in, you will know to always accent the next to the last syllable. Okay? Yes?
It says earlier in that in this case, the goal would be long.
No. Segol is only long if it has a hey following it. And segol is only long if it's at the end of a word with a final hey. Okay? That goes back to the chart on page what, 39 or 29, something like that? Is it 39? Yeah, on page 39, I think is where Jan is talking about, where you have tone long segol. That tone long segol, as I said in class the other day and answered the same question, and the A-class pure characteristic long just to the right of it, both have a have a hey at the end. So that's a segol hey at the end of a word. And the word I put on the board that day was saphe, as an illustration. That long E in that chart has to do only with this situation and no other. Okay? Only with that situation and no other. Yes?
So why don't we consider the segol hey a full letter vowel?
The segol hey because it's too rare. And so no one considers that a full letter vowel. And because when we talk about full letter vowels, we're really, in essence, the origin of that is what consonants or what letters of the Hebrew alphabet were used in the pre-Masoretic period to indicate the vowel sounds. The hey was not used at Qumran to indicate a segol ever. It always indicated a comments. Therefore, we do not confuse that situation by calling this a full letter vowel. It behaves like one, but it doesn't have the history to be one. Okay? Good question, Eric. All right? All right, let's go back here again to this. We have the next conjunctive accent is called the metheg. The metheg, and right away you know the name metheg has to be a segolate noun, and that's why I'm emphasizing it on the first syllable. It has two segols if you're to spell it out in Hebrew. Here we have akala. Akala. Notice it's not okla. It's akla. Akla. The metheg tells us that this comments is to be retained in an open syllable. It is an accented syllable. Therefore, this cannot be a comments hatuf. Remember, a comments hatuf is in a closed, unaccented syllable. So you have two words that are looking identical except for the accent. You have akala and you have okla are spelled exactly the same. The Masoretes inserted the accent so you'd know which is which is okla and which is akla. Very, very important to remember. So the metheg is an accent, and it's usually a secondary accent. It's considered a secondary accent. And it's used primarily to keep a syllable open that would by other means be considered closed. And it is called a conjunctive accent because the fact that it retains a relationship within the word. It's the only conjunctive that's within the word and not within the sentence. It does not conjoin to the following word. This is in order to show a conjoining within the word. It's the only one that does that. The only accent that does that is the metheg. Robin.
You only get it with the comments?
Pardon?
You only get it with the comments, or do you get it with other vowels?
No, it can occur with any vowel. Okay? It just here is occurring with comments. All right? It forces the syllable to remain open. It helps identify variant pronunciation of similar words. Here's another example. Yira'u as opposed to yir'u. Yira'u as opposed to yir'u. It makes a difference. They're two totally different words with two totally different meanings. And the accent is what helps to distinguish them, and it changes the pronunciation. The first one is ye, and it has to stay open, so it becomes a long ye, excuse me. Ye, ra'u. The schwa becomes vocal. Ye, ra'u. In the second one, the hirik is short and the schwa is silent. Year, u. Year, u. Instead of ye, ra'u. All right? Kelly.
So in the first word, would the syllable line be after the yod, and then the second word it'd be after the resh?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, you've got it right. Okay? Any other questions there? All right. It aids in pronouncing long words. And this is where it becomes more of a secondary accent. You have me ha'aretz. The accent is still on ah in the aretz, but you have a secondary accent. You have me ha'aretz. The me is not as strong as the ah, but the me is stronger than the ha or the retz. Okay? And you can tell here, since me ha'aretz is accented on the next to last syllable, and you see a segol under the resh, this is a segolate noun also. The comments under the aleph only occurs when you have the article on it. We'll find out that later. This is actually the noun Eretz, like Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. Eretz is a segolate noun, and it's accented on the next to last syllable. All right. We're going to stop here. We'll continue this on Tuesday, because I want to take this last little bit, one more opportunity to read through the vocabulary with you again real quickly at the end of chapter 4 and the end of chapter 5 to help prepare you for your quiz on Tuesday. So page 41, please respond by pronouncing the word as I do after me. On page 41, let's start at the upper right and work across the page. Edom.
Edom.
Az.
Az.
Elot.
Elot.
And the other one there is Elat.
Elat.
El.
El.
Yam.
Yam.
La.
La.
Al.
Al.
Etzion Geber.
Etzion Geber.
Safa.
Safa.
Shalomo.
Shalomo.
Shemuel.
Shemuel.
Shamer.
Shamer.
Melech.
Melech.
Ruach.
Ruach.
Shaman.
Shaman.
Gavoach.
Gavoah.
Diber.
Diber.
Katal.
Katal.
And then let's go to the end of chapter 5, page 50. Page 50. Do the same thing. Yareh.
Yareh.
Chokmah.
Chokmah.
Shakan.
Shakan.
Kol.
Kol.
Lev.
Lev.
Levav.
Levav.
Layala.
Layla.
Midbar.
Midbar,
Kokav,
Kokav,
Kohain,
Kohain,
Ra'ah,
Ra'ah,
Nephesh,
Nefesh,
Peri,
Peri,
Nathan,
Nathan,
Am,
Am,
Evid,
Evid,
Kara,
Kara,
Allah,
Allah,
Nasa,
Nasa,
Ir,
Ir,
Ayin,
Ayin,
Asa,
Asa,